Okay, we're going to get started. All those returning from the tour, I'm sure you were impressed. I know this is a beautiful, beautiful building. So my name is Jeremy Paul, and I'm now the dean at Northeastern University School of Law, where I've been for, this is my second year. My students call me a 2L. I want to start by thanking Phil Weiser and the University of Colorado for hosting this wonderful conference. I'm going to be the moderator, and the topic is building an effective team and a collaborative culture. And I want to congratulate the organizers on having found for us such a marvelous team of folks to talk about this. I get to ask them questions and listen to their wise counsel. So to my immediate left is Dr. Patricia Kusler, who's now the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the University of Washington School of Law, where she's been for 20 years. She's the director of the Center for Science and Global Health. Is that the right name?
Law Science.
And also has worked as a medical director for Blue Cross and at the law firm of Hogan and Hartson. And so we should expect to hear a lot of interdisciplinary perspectives from her. To her immediate left is Anthony Crowell, who is the president and dean of New York Law School, where he's been since May of 2012. He came to academics through a long career outside of law schools, serving just before joining New York Law School as the counselor for Mayor Bloomberg in New York City. He taught as an adjunct for many years, both at New York Law School and at Brooklyn, so he wasn't entirely a stranger, but he will also have a unique perspective. And then to Dean Crowell's left is Jenna Buffalo. She, I think, has the most diverse career of anyone on the panel, if not in the room. She's a graduate of Harvard Law School and was a public defender, worked as a lawyer for a major telecommunications firm, but she also worked as a media person for the Gates Foundation, is an expert in Jungian psychology, and now has her own business as an organizational consultant and a coach, which I guess is based here in Boulder. So I'm delighted that all three agreed to serve on this panel. We're going to do a little bit of what Fiona said in the last panel is hard for people who study law, which is we're going to talk a lot about the how of getting things done within a law school, as opposed to only the what, which I guess was the subject of the previous panel. It is astonishing how when you find yourself immersed in law school administration, you suddenly go to meetings where people talk for hours about how do you organize your meetings and who comes and when do they come, and but nonetheless that is the case. And for me, I'm the lifer on the panel. Before being at Northeastern, I was at the University of Connecticut for 23 years and served 8 years as an associate dean and 5 years as dean. So I'm 15 years in a row doing this, which is why it's good I'm moderating and not talking, or I would never shut up. So without further ado, I thought that I gathered there was a panel a little bit on this in the beginning, so I'm going to change it somewhat. But obviously, one of the questions that any team has to consider as you're trying to figure out what messages you're getting out to the various constituencies whom you serve is to what extent are you perceived as a united front, folks with similar values, similar backgrounds, similar skills, and alternatively, to what extent are you perceived as this member of the team handles this kind of question, this member of the team handles that kind of question, and so the community knows, well, if I have this kind of problem, I go here, and if I have that kind of problem, go there. And that's connected, I think, to what kind of person people are chosen to serve on the teams, and how much cross-training you do about each person knowing each other's jobs. So I thought I would start with that and see how you want to react to that.
Well, I think it kind of depends on what the mission is. In sort of setting up the teams who are going to do a project, it depends on what the nature of the project is. For example, early on in my career at UW, I worked with a bunch of folks from several different schools to set up an interdisciplinary program on law, ethics, and genomics. And there, of course, the question was, who were the players? How could we put them together in a way that would help us build this interdisciplinary program. And so the players were not so much in the law school, but our connections with the graduate school and the other departments and schools. And once we had a group of people who believed in the project, and that's pretty key. Some people will never believe in any project, and they are never going to be on your team. But once you have a group of believers, then you can sort of parcel out the tasks on the basis of the strengths of the group. In the law school, if we're doing a new project, we're just putting up an undergraduate curriculum next year. And so in assembling the team for that, I basically told the entire faculty that we were contemplating putting up some undergraduate offerings, and I would welcome anyone who was interested to send us their ideas, and we would post them, and then once we had a critical mass, we would get together as a group and decide how we could proceed. It turned out to be quite a worthwhile enterprise because I soon had 10 or 12 of our 60 faculty who were interested. And then we began to meet, and it narrowed down to 5 or 6 who were really, really interested, and that's the group that sort of put together our new undergraduate curriculum. So I think a lot of it is the team will self-identify, and then the question is, can they be coalesced into a united mission? And then how do you assign the tasks?
And how do you do that? How do you coalesce them into a united mission?
Well, usually it actually happens because they believe in the project. And that's pretty key. And if you try to coerce people to believe in the project, that never works. So if they don't actually affirmatively want to be engaged, it's very hard to bring them along as supportive and productive team members.
For me, I came in to New York Law School at a real inflection point for the institution. It had just been battered in the press and had a lawsuit brought against it. And so it was a very challenging time, and it was a time when I think we all had to own up to the challenges we were confronted with. And I had to build a team. And I was coming in from an environment in government where I had worked for 15 years, but almost 11 years with Mayor Bloomberg in his bullpen, a place without walls, as many of you may know, and a place where everyone who had a seat in that one room had an equal stake in the game and was called on to do any variety of things in addition to their core function. And moving into an academic and administrative position, because in my role at New York Law School, I'm both dean and president, so I'm in charge of everything. I don't have a university above, a central university that I report to. I don't have a university president that I report to. I report to a board of trustees. I had to really assess the varying constituencies and understand what the team would look like. And obviously, I was hired with the notion that change needed to be made, and it had to do that very deliberately. I had to be very careful. I had to be very measured in the steps we took, but also I had to act quickly and understanding that in an academic setting we're on cycles and that things needed to be done in a way that were responsible but responsive to the circumstances on the ground. So I really set out to understand all the different players. So obviously there's the senior team, and then there's the faculty, and then the board, and then also understanding the alumni concerns and the student concerns. And I had a good sense of the student concerns. I'd been an adjunct professor there for nearly a decade. But it was really a full-throated approach and conversations with everyone to understand the priorities that I needed to ensure everyone understood and believed in, and that I was going to set a tone that was respectful of a lot of extraordinary work that had been done, but also that signaled we had to take that work and move it in a different direction to change the direction of the school and the dialogue about the school. And so the toughest thing really was who would serve on that senior team. And obviously I went in with the notion that it could be all of them. It could be some of them. And it was very difficult because I think any time there's change, there's fear. And sometimes fear will bring out a lot of information from individuals, and some people will hold it in. So it was extremely difficult. But understanding that, it was important to get a sense of who believed in change, who believed that their voice maybe hadn't been heard about how things could take shape, and whether they were up for the task, a rather Herculean task, to move the institution forward with some speed. And I wound up making some significant changes. And while I was appointed at the end of February of 2012, I took a 3-month lead time to really transition. I had the benefit of being employed at a place that was 6 blocks away from the law school. So it was rather fluid. I was able to go to the school virtually every day at some point to accomplish some of that goal. And then during that summer period, but I wound up putting in place a new academic dean, a new admissions dean, and a new career planning dean, all before that new academic year started. Those decisions were made not only based on those conversations, but conversations of the entire faculty and with some students, and really just it was a very careful process. And it was difficult. Hiring a new academic dean was a challenge, and one of the things that kept coming back to me was the woman I ultimately hired was someone who people said was the future of the law school, someone who they thought at some point would be a dean. And I thought, well, if she's the future of the law school and at some point she could be a dean, why not have her? She and I had a similar vision for the school in terms of broadening clinical and experiential learning, had a similar understanding of the operations of the school, but I thought she could serve as an effective counterweight and person to help me with the faculty and be someone who could tell me where I'm going in the right direction and not going in the right direction. And that was the way I really endeavored to make all the team choices that I made. But someone who didn't have a fear of managing up, telling me I was wrong, but also respecting that there was a tone and a direction that we had to take, and helping me carry that out and helping to have the faculty be as supportive as possible.
Great.
Great. So I think my perspective is a little different since I'm on the outside, not the inside, building a team. But and I'm always comparing what do I see with my clients, which are mostly Silicon Valley big companies, with what I'm seeing with my friends who stayed in the law and are now in law firms and professors at law schools. And so I think I make a distinction, Jeremy, as you put it, the what and the how, and that to have a diversity of viewpoints is absolutely essential. But you don't necessarily want a diversity of like leadership skills. So there really is a hierarchy of leadership styles, and there are more and less constructive styles. There really is such a thing as toxicity on a team, just from the way somebody shows up. And I see my clients making the mistake of thinking that they're being inclusive or non-judgmental by tolerating that, when actually there are huge costs to that down the road in a team. So the unifying thing I would look for is someone who's going to bring, all the leadership skills that are really important to making progress.
So let me ask you a question about that specific point. Often, in a place that really needs a lot of change, whether that's because the external market is changing or because things have just not changed for a long time, there's a trade-off between people who are perceived as gentle and easy to get along with, who everybody likes, but who won't push, right? And then people who are maybe push too hard and cross over to what you're calling toxic. Obviously, all of us seeking to build a team would like people like, the Goldilocks version.
Right.
But Goldilocks is not always available.
Yeah.
And to the extent that you're trying to, steer the ship in the right direction, how do you make the trade-off between, someone who's a little too pushy or someone who's a little too gentle? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm careful that I'm not going to sound too harsh on lawyers. Like, I'm one of you, okay? I came from you, so I think of lawyers as my people, and so take that as where I come from. I would say it is hard to find the Goldilocks version, especially in the legal field, because there is not a tradition of really training people in leadership skills. So you can be absolutely honest and very committed to making change and doing that in a way that is, really impeccable. And for me, I didn't learn any of this until about my mid-30s when I started doing leadership courses and just was blown away by how much you can learn. You don't have to be born. I mean, some people are born with it, lucky people. I certainly wasn't. So, you're right. There's very often not the Goldilocks, but I think part of that is systemic, and investing more in training lawyers and people in academia would create more of those Goldilocks possibilities.
Hire more coaches. Okay, so that's a good start. So now I guess the next question is, all of us have been to a million boring meetings, right? And I've had people who've resigned from boards because the meetings are too boring. And the standard version of the boring meeting is people sit around a room and report. My department did this, my department did that, my department did this, and by the time you're done, it's like you all want to blow your brains out. So what do you do in meetings to change it up so that more real and candid conversation takes place?
Well, I think part of it depends on the size of the meeting. If you have a very large meeting, it's very difficult to get a stimulating conversation going because you just have too many people who want to chime in. And so I think many of our projects at the law school, we have a variety of different meeting styles. Sometimes it's the big group, and sometimes it is people reporting out. And then there's the other more dynamic situation where you have a much smaller group of people who are wrestling with the real issues and problems that are coming up in moving a particular project forward. And then I think there's a lot more give and take. And I don't really think there's actually often a leader. More it's a matter of everybody is kind of pitching in, trying to figure out how to make this program move forward. And then the various constituencies of that meeting go back to their cohorts who are part of the larger group.
And how do you make that happen, that second part? Because if you do the first part, right, with a small meeting, and then you don't do the second part, then you just get clobbered with, you're not transparent.
Yeah, and we make mistakes. Absolutely, we make mistakes on this. And it is very difficult sometimes to be able to make it all move in a concerted fashion, and it often doesn't. But I think that's part of being a dynamic institution is you will make mistakes. So you try as the best you can to be able to get the information and the tasks dispersed in a way that is fair, consistent, and will take you forward. Sometimes you fail,
Right.
And that's just part of the natural, organic system, so to speak, of the law school or of any project.
Yeah. So every Monday morning, I meet with my senior team, and it's a group of about 12, both from the academic side of the house as well as the operational side of the house. And the question I pose to them is, tell me something that I don't know about New York Law School. And it challenges them to come up with something that is about the change of the institution, a unique thing that happened, something that we all need to be mindful of that's occurring, a trend. I'm very big on data, and oftentimes there are unique data points that arise as a result of that question, and that's helpful for all of us to get on the same page. And also, one of the things I find extremely valuable is I start with going over my calendar, and I always do 2 weeks out. So there'll be a little bit of overlap from week to week, but the notion is if I'm highlighting what the main activities on my calendar are, it's all about the value add. What can someone on my team tell me I need to know and how I need to be prepared to maximize the encounter that I'm having, whether it's with a potential donor, whether it's with a group of faculty members about a project, whether it's with an employer with whom we may have had a relationship. And the whole team then understands the lay of the land and really starts to take ownership for the outcomes collectively and really has a stake in offering advice. And it's interesting because different parts of the house really have a lot to say about things that you wouldn't ordinarily think they would be contributing to. And so that's of great value to me. And similarly to what you were saying, we talk about our projects. We undertook a very significant strategic planning process. My goal was to have a strategic plan in place at my 1-year anniversary, and it was it was a very involved process. We actually started with an operational review, and that was an all hands on deck process. And I brought in someone with me from city government who headed the Office of Operations. And I had seen that there were some operational challenges at the school. We started with empowering a broad group of individuals who worked at the mid to lower levels of the school because they understood the line concerns. They understood how things actually worked, where the rubber met the road. And across 20 functional areas, we plucked individuals out of there, 25 individuals who comprised 5 different review teams. And we learned a whole bunch about the school. And by learning that, we identified, I think, 300 items for improvement. We prioritized 97 of them, and we hit the ground running as of January 1 of 13 in trying to make changes in those areas. But those are things that keep coming up for our big staff meeting. Where's the progress, where's the metrics? But that allowed us to then go into that strategic planning function, which really is a faculty function. And the faculty played a great role as an advisor. We had a faculty advisory board on the operational review. Once we understood the operations of the school and how it impacted faculty and students and alums and prospective students, we could then engage in a strategic planning process that was really reflective of challenges, but also of the opportunities ahead of us. And so that takes up a good chunk of our time on those Monday morning meetings as to where we stand. And we have a document I'm very proud of that really outlines the vision for legal education at New York Law School, and it embraces the big overriding theme is we are New York's law school. And so, as I was just saying to Jenna, and this is something the faculty really supported, all roads lead to and from New York City. And that's what we think. But it helps.
It's like the New Yorker magazine cover.
Yes, but it helps us frame the experience for the student and the opportunities that lie within the city, especially our lower Manhattan location, where our campus really is Wall Street, the courts, and the tech sector. It's pretty incredible. And so it's about maximizing that. So that's how I've built the commitments of the faculty and my senior team really to drive that.
Great. All right. Well, I'm going to anticipate your critique of this answer being touchy-feely, so I'll just put that out there. But a model that I find really useful is when you think about success, so whether you're thinking about success of a meeting or success of an entire organization, that you're always thinking on 3 dimensions, or should be. So it's the I, the we, and the it. And the it is the task. What are you trying to get done? And it's absolutely critical that that gets done, because without that, you don't have a company, you don't have a school, there's no point in having an organization if that's not absolutely rigorously adhered to. But the other 2 dimensions are what we call the human dimension, and the relationships, which is there a real sense of trust and solidarity here? And the I, which is individual well-being, how are people doing? And if you look at some companies like Apple in the sort of mid-'80s, like really explosive period of growth, those guys, and they were all guys at the time, were really good friends, actually. And they were getting amazing things done together, and they were hanging out together on the weekends and doing barbecues with their family. And I just completed a piece of work for, I think actually I shouldn't say, a Silicon Valley company where that executive team is not faking it. Like, they are close to each other. They really know each other. And what I see as a trend, and I can say Google because this is very public at Google, is that in their meetings, they're not just coming in and jumping into the it and what are we here to get done. They're acknowledging each other as human beings first. So what that looks like is a check-in where you go around and everybody says, actually, how are you doing today? Because I know you're not just a brain walking in here, you're a whole human being. You come in with a life. So if somebody came in and they didn't get any sleep last night because they've got a new adopted baby at home, that's totally relevant for this meeting. Because if I don't know that about this person, I can interpret how they show up as just not being interested or being mad at me. So it just takes the guessing out of it. And just by strengthening the relationships like that, it's just so much easier to get great things done with people when the relationships are real and you actually really trust these people and you know them. That would be my touchy-feely answer.
I don't think it's touchy-feely, but I think it's aspirational in some cases. In other words, yeah, if everybody can be really good friends, that's wonderful. Although I clearly have experienced situations in which some people are good friends, and then maybe one or two members of the team doesn't fit into that friend thing. And that can be a problem, because if four of them go out to dinner on the weekends and they talk about work, and then they come back and the four, here's what we're going to do, and the fifth one's like, what, huh, right? And then the fourth think, how come that person is so negative, right? And of course, also there's a risk that if you said at Apple they were all guys, well, if four of them are guys and one of them is a woman, and she's the one who doesn't get involved, that's a problem. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree it's aspirational that everybody would be friends. Sometimes that happens, and it's not the typical thing. I think even when you have a situation where there's that awkwardness, I mean, there's a few just basic standards. One of them is agreeing as a group that there will be no third-party conversations, which means that nobody is having conversations about somebody where if that person were in the room, they would be really disappointed in what they were hearing that person say. That is an ultimate betrayal of a relationship. It's totally toxic to the group. So even if you are friends, your commitment, and I was part of a consulting company that had this as a rule, and it was amazing. I knew I was not being talked about behind my back with these other consultants. And it just gave me a whole different level of trust for my teammates. So if someone had an issue with me, the agreement we all had is they would come to me, and I would do the same for them. So I'd say that's like one level below friends, but that changes so much when people trust they're not being talked about behind their back.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. What I would say is that if the edict not to talk about people behind their back is experienced by the group as the leader is clamping down on honest conversation. So, for example, if, to use your adopted child thing, if a member of the group came in and was exhausted, and then later on I said to someone, God, that person is really struggling because they have a lot to deal with it at home. I'm talking about them behind their back, but it's in an empathetic way. That's okay.
You can check yourself. You know if it's in support of this person or if it's basically tearing the person down.
Yeah. So no backbiting, in other words.
Yeah, no backbiting. And to your thing about it being aspirational, I mean, I started this work in 2005, and at that time it was like, it was so swimming against the current. I was with a consulting company called Axiolent, and I remember like crying after some of these days, and my mentor, my boss at the time, this great guy named Fred Kaufman, he would say, listen, if you really want to do hard work, you go into the heart of darkness. Like, you don't preach to the choir. Like, there's a reason that you're at Microsoft at the time struggling like this. And my whole career was just these really hard days because people didn't buy it. They didn't believe in it. And what happened over the years is that there has been this momentum that, I am astounded by what is considered normal now, especially in Silicon Valley. And they're all competing with each other right now, and they know that culture is a huge factor in where the best talent decides to work.
Right.
And so they're just taking that so seriously. So hiring leaders that aren't just great at what they do, they have to be absolute top, but they're also people that people love working for and people really trust. And that's, it's happening so fast. I say no to a lot of clients now where I feel like I would have that struggling feeling. Struggled enough. I'm done with it. But it's happening. It's happening out there.
Right. Well, there's an expression, right, in all the business literature that culture eats strategy.
Yes,
So no matter
exactly. For breakfast.
No matter how good your strategy is, if you have the wrong culture. That's why I asked the question that we started with, which is, how do you make your meetings better? Because that's very, very important. I've started to say to my people, come in, tell me. I like what you said about that something I don't know. Tell me something that's really hard for you. Mm-hmm. Right? What's an issue don't tell me the good things, and then we can talk about it. I want to go back to the point that you made about mistakes. Mm-hmm. So you said that we all make mistakes, and we do. I remember I once was trying to recruit someone to be an associate dean, and she said to me, "Tell me what kind of mistakes make you the most upset? And my answer was integrity mistakes. So I said, if you make a mistake and you tell me about it, then we have a problem. But if you make a mistake and you don't tell me about it, then you have a big problem, right? Because I can't possibly function if people are not going to tell me what's going to. So how do you handle the culture of getting people to bring mistakes to the fore?
In most cases, the mistake is pretty evident pretty quickly. So just last week, in fact, we made a decision, and it was the core group of the senior group of deans. And we had to make the decision quickly. We made it quickly, and we undertook to disseminate it quickly. But we didn't involve the larger group of all of our assistant deans and managers. And that was a huge mistake, because some of it flashed back on them, and they had no clue what was going on. So yes, that was a mistake, and we've had to we're in the process of attempting to remedy that error right now. But yes, that was a mistake. It was a well-meaning mistake. It wasn't a bad decision. It was a well-reasoned decision. But because we didn't communicate it internally down the chain appropriately, it's turned out to be a mistake that we need not have made. So this happens frequently, not in the sense that most of the time we do it right, but sometimes this happens no matter how hard you try and how well-meaning you are. And then you just got to take your lumps and say, we did this wrong. Yeah. And expect to get beaten with a piece of wet spaghetti a few times and take it like, a lady or gentleman.
Yeah, I think how you recover from your mistakes is probably among the most important things, and how you communicate, what you've done and what the steps were to remedy the situation. It's critically important, because if you lose credibility, then that's as we're saying, it's really among the hardest things to rehabilitate yourself on. And so, absolutely. And that happens in a variety of settings. Often it happens with students, and that's among the toughest group to win back. So
Yeah.
it's really being mindful and very careful about what is being done, what decisions are being made, and how you communicate them. One of the things I've found is that when we make major decisions, and I find this with the faculty, I explain very carefully and in great detail. I'm very committed to being transparent. And if I explain in great detail what we've done, why we've done it, if that decision turns out to be a mistake, at least people understand. It gives people an opportunity to possibly correct me or others who have made the decision, but it gives everyone a collective stake in the outcome. So I'm very, I've done some things that some deans would consider risky in terms of moving quickly on things, and I bring the faculty along. I have lots and lots of open dialogue. I put everything before them. It's basically I stand there naked, so to speak, on a lot of stuff. Put lots of numbers out there, put lots of realities out there, and it's worked incredibly well. And I've been fortunate, knock on wood, that I've had a very supportive group of colleagues. So.
Right. I mean, you're in a very unusual situation for a law school dean, in the sense that you're really in control of all of your numbers. So nobody can say to you when they look at the numbers, why don't you go back to the university and cut a better deal? Because there's no, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said about supportive colleagues, I think that's a huge piece of it. And just, is there real trust on the team? It's one thing to admit a mistake where you really trust the people you're working things out with. If everyone's guarded and defended and keeping score, then to admit a mistake, now I just lost points and someone else gained points. And that's not an environment where I really want to speak up about how I screwed up. I think one of the most seductive, really, leadership skills is an apology. If somebody does that authentically, I will do anything for that person. That is authentically, absolutely.
There's a culture I've found where people say, you should apologize. And I'm just like, luckily that hasn't been lobbed at me, but I'm watching this on film. I'm like, you can't force someone to apologize unless it's going to be genuine.
Absolutely.
But you're absolutely right. If it is genuine, that's greatest recognition.
Yeah. And you can also genuinely apologize, even if you didn't mean to cause harm. Right. Your intention can be so right on, and yet you still ended up causing harm. And that's worth an apology too.
So how about communication from the team out, do you have formal structures to make sure that, like newsletters that go out to make sure, when you have your team meeting, do you keep minutes so that when you go back again, do you meet with students regularly? How do you handle those issues?
Well, at our law school, we have a plethora of opportunities. We send out, there's a law news daily that goes out. There's a weekly thing that goes out to students and to staff and faculty. We have a website that maintains lots of notices on what's going on in the law school. We have minutes of most of our meetings, for the faculty meetings, are all posted on the web so people can go back. We have new initiatives, and everything that's going on with various little committees are posted on our SharePoint site so that it's dedicated to our faculty can get into it. We
great.
also have, what we don't do is we don't keep minutes of our large, sort of the greater group of administrators, the senior administrators. When we meet, there's about 15 of us. It's often more ad hoc than that, and we've never kept minutes of that. Nor do we keep meetings of our core dean staff. I think that one of the things we learned from this episode last week is what we may need to do is figure out what our mechanism is for communicating quickly to the outer circle what's gone on in the inner circle. And that's a challenge for us that we learned just last week.
Right.
And prior to that, it had not been a problem because nothing had come up that had demonstrated that lack of communication. So,
Yeah, I've changed communication substantially. One of the things I'm really committed to is making sure we're all operating from the same playbook, that we all have the same base of knowledge about the institution, that we all have the same base of knowledge about current events, that we all have the same base of knowledge as to what's affecting students. And so things have changed in a couple of ways. I'll give you an example of a week in short order. Every morning, by 10 a.m., I've committed to the faculty and staff that they will get a report from our communications staff about how New York Law School is in the news, whether good or bad, and then what are the major articles about legal education and the legal profession every day. And so that is something that's delivered with links, and we catalog that so if people can go back to on our web portal and get information on a day-by-day basis about the school or about legal ed and the profession generally. That's really helpful. It used to be the case that emails would get sent around ad hoc with 70 people replying to them, and this is created a much more systematic approach for making sure we're all on the same page with current events and what's going on. Also, I want to make sure that we're accurately capturing the work of our faculty and the work of the administration and students. And so every week at the end of the week, we do a wrap-up. So we talk about if somebody had something published, we talk about who's presented at what conference. So it's really a roster, almost an honor roll of sorts, but everyone who did something gets a mention. The whole community sees it, and it's been very beneficial to see the scope and breadth of what we're actually doing.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually inspired productivity. When you see the mass of what your colleagues are doing, you're like, wow, that's great. It's also inspired a greater level of collaboration because everyone is getting a sense of what others are working on in a more consistent manner. And that's been helpful. And I also talk about what we're doing operationally or to meet our strategic planning goals. And so that's there. And similarly, we have our faculty meeting minutes readily available. But there's at least 2 student communications each week. And I find that students, you need to give them short bits of information, not expansive because they don't pay attention. But they get one from academic affairs and one from career planning. And we're trying to sort of thread them together a little more closely, but we want to make sure they're paying attention.
That's great. So I know you don't personally do this, but how do you advise people to handle it?
Well, I think everything you're describing is great. I mean, systematizing it like that is great. I think the hard thing is when you're communicating something really hard, where there really is an awkward story behind it. And that I would just say that people's bullshit detectors are way different than they used to be. So on the last panel, they're starting to get into how people are, how your students are different now than they were 15 years ago. And it's going to be true with your faculty too. So there's this great New Yorker cartoon. It says, this CEO is delivering his company's address, and he said, "We'll continue to be the same great company we've always been, only we will cease to exist." That's the kind of thing companies used to, and schools
seen
used
that,
to,
yes.
right, get away with. That you can't get away with that anymore. So if something is awkward, holding a meeting where you're just really genuine about answering questions, and some questions you may not be able to answer, some questions you may have the answer to, and choose not to answer, and it's just real. People respect that. They know from their own lives some things are.
Yeah, I
messy.
find, especially in these truly turbulent times, if we are not operating with that same base of knowledge and operating from the same playbook, there is a tendency for things to take a life of their own on. And I have a rule: everything gets responded to the same day it arises, simply because it just spreads. And I find myself having more meetings with staff who are not in faculty meetings, but we really encourage them to bring their concerns and questions about how things are changing and taking shape. And it's helpful, and it dispels rumors and oftentimes things that are completely blown out of proportion or untrue. So in times of change, I think that's critically important. So your point is really well taken. Just I like to go head first into the storm on these things.
So one of the titles of the panel is Building a Collaborative Culture. And one of the experiences that the folks here who are about to become, or have been for a while, associate deans, is that resources are tighter than they've been in the past. By the way, being an associate dean is a great job. It's in a lot of ways, right now, because resources are so tight, I was saying this to Kelly and Patricia just a little earlier, presidents and provosts at most universities that have law schools are obsessed with the money-losing aspects of their law schools. So deans are just dragged off into endless budget. What will your budget look like in 2019 and 2020? And because of that, we're gone, and all of you, therefore, are getting to do a lot of the fun stuff that you went into it, like working with the faculty and planning for competencies, like in the last panel. But as resources get tighter, to go back to the collaborative culture point, people are, to use your choice phrase, bullshit detectors. There are also people who are shirker detectors, yes. Right? So to the extent that you're trying to lure people to collaborate, but you put up with, well, that person never does anything, and that person never does anything, it just sort of eats away at the culture. So how do you deal with that problem?
Well, of course, in times of budgetary constraint, which is the entire history of my time in academia, you cannot ignore budgetary reality. And of course, it's become much more relevant over the last few years. I think in law schools and in universities at large. I mean, I work in what we now call a state-located university, where the state contribution to our operation is small, very small. So our tuition's gone up, the expectations are high, and as we devote scarce budget dollars to projects, we have to be very careful to make sure that we get some bang for our buck. And so it's not comforting when someone comes and says, I have this great new idea for this course or this project. How much will you pay me to do it?
Right.
Until there's some meat, not much. If I get another, I have the other experience would be someone coming and saying, I've got this great idea. I want to try it out. Can I try it out and let's see how it works? And maybe it'll build into something that will generate revenue, generate good feelings, generate bonuses of some type, either emotional, financial, educational, whatever. I'm probably going to be pretty happy about taking that on.
Right.
And you do get faculty members who always come in with how much you're going to pay me to do this. And you do get faculty members who are always the good guys who come in and say, I got this great idea, I really want to try it. And then you've got a bunch in between. So some of it is trying to convert the how much you're going to pay me to do this to the other kind who say, well, maybe I'll try this and see how it works, and is it going to be something that's going to be feasible? And some of our greatest projects have come in through that doorway. And some of the ones that eventually, where initially the faculty member was primarily interested in the bucks, have come about because the faculty member said, gee, I really want to do this, and maybe I should give it a try, and then maybe I can get some bonus for it after the fact. So, I mean, I think there's a number of ways to impress them with the budget. I think being transparent about the budget is key. We are very transparent with our faculty about our budget. Our dean is very clear about what our constraints are. We hear that presentation every fall. We have talked for many years now about diversifying our revenue portfolio and the challenges of bringing in funded research dollars, tuition dollars, project dollars, dollars from donors is part of our every year conversation and frequent updates during the year. When we have good news, it's really good news. We all get to share in it. When we have bad news, we also all get to share in that. We do have the shirkers, the people who do not listen during these presentations and appear to have no understanding of the fact that there is a budget. And there's, and so re-education is necessary. And sometimes that is saying, no, you may not go to Paris for that conference.
So I agree. Let me address a couple things. On the shirker question, I'd like to think that we're trying to at least evolve our culture where there's no place to hide. And I've been incredibly supportive of scholarship and have found new ways to help our scholars really build their brands and to give our clinicians great opportunities to be wildly creative. We've doubled our clinical programs. There's no shortage of work and no shortage of thoughtful resource allocation in both those areas, despite resources shrinking. Mm-hmm. And it's really educating them about how the budget is taking shape. On the notion of nowhere to hide, one of the biggest concerns I have, and although we've offered retirement packages and to mixed success, because there are a tremendous number of highly productive faculty members who do complain, and it's complicated, as you all know. One of the things we've created this Institute for Excellence in Law Teaching, and so where we see that there is a bit of a challenge with some faculty members in the classroom, I have a dynamic group of faculty members who've taken this on, and we are coming together collaboratively to talk about the latest strategies, the latest approaches for teaching today's law students. What did you used to do 10 years ago? Here's what we're doing in our classrooms. Mm-hmm. And so it's really great, and there's almost been a buddy system created. We have some faculty members who I think were largely just using the same materials year after year, not really being creative or really pushing the envelope in terms of how they could be more successful in the classroom. They're learning new strategies, and it's working because they have this buddy through this new institute. The other thing is on collaborating. I like to think that I've developed with my team a system of what I call participatory budgeting. And participatory budgeting is, let's sort of think through things as a group and where our resources should be allocated and what is it that we're spending money on now that should be discontinued. And I came up with, it was a very different kind of exercise. We had a faculty meeting and I said, it was a budget presentation, and I sort of laid out what the goals were for reducing the budget. And I said, how we get there is going to be in part written by those of you in this room. And we broke from the faculty meeting early. They went back to their offices, and in their inboxes was a link to a survey, a SurveyMonkey. Everyone feels comfortable with the anonymity of SurveyMonkey. And I asked them a series of questions about, so let me just quickly tell you, this is what I think brought everyone together. I said, if you were dean for a day and had to make choices about expenditures, what would you reduce or eliminate? Second, what would you preserve or invest more in no matter what the financial situation? The third thing was, what 3 things should we work hardest to accomplish in the next 5 years? And then, which programs, if any, do you believe have fallen short of their promise? I got the most incredible responses. And they really did center on a core group of programs and areas where we allocate resources that we were able to make strategic choices. And I gave a full report. We did a survey breakdown. went back into the faculty meeting 2 weeks later and gave a full analysis of this. And it really helped us understand programs that we would ultimately better and more deeply evaluate to possibly eliminate.
That's a great idea, yeah.
And because what I found was, and I was really frustrated by this, as I told you when I started, I went and had an hour-long meeting with every single faculty member. That was 70 meetings I had over the course of 2 months.
Wow.
And people were pretty honest. But when it came to the group, no one talked. No one spoke up. No one would say, you know, our mental disability law is a really great program, but there's only 6 people in it and we're spending too much. Because they didn't want to hurt their colleagues' feelings. And I can appreciate that. But you know what they all said on that survey? Mental disability law should be reshaped. And so it was an opportunity for us to have validation as to some certain budget approaches that we would be taking, but in a way that wasn't hurtful because, you know, and it was a collective, it became a bit of collective decision making. It was helpful. And so people appreciated that. And there were no winners or losers in this. The reality was that you had not only perception, but then we were able to go and do data analysis and prove that, yes, these are where the choices needed to be made.
You want to tackle the Shirker question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting the way you phrase the question, and what's the link between shrinking budgets and collaboration? Because you need to do more with something else, which is possibly your human resources and the people who are getting things done. So a distinction I find useful is one between commitment and compliance. So compliance is when people those are the shirkers, right? They're showing up and they're going to do as little as possible to check off the box to now leave me alone. And commitment is when your heart and soul is involved. And when that happens is when people as a group really have trust and good relationships with each other. So I'm going to make another plug for culture there.
All right, we shouldn't take too much more time so we can have time for questions. So just why don't you each give one final tip of how to build a collaborative culture?
I guess my tip would be to know the players in the project that you're doing. Sometimes the players may not be law faculty, they may be university administrators, or they may be faculty from other departments. And it's key to know who your partners are going to be, whether for this particular project. If you want to build an interdisciplinary project, you can't necessarily focus only on your law faculty. I have a good example of this in the sense that we have a very large global health department, and I was told, that we have a wonderful multidisciplinary program. And I said, what disciplines are involved? And they said, well, pediatrics and obstetrics. Well, not what I would call multidisciplinary, okay? So I think they made a mistake. It's a mistake that is not figuring out exactly who your partner should be for the project you want to do.
I would say that when developing teams, make sure that there is a diversity of skill set and a diversity of strengths and opinions there. But make sure that people can work together and that you're not going to have someone on a team who's going to be more destructive than they are constructive. And sometimes, just because somebody wants to be part of a team doesn't mean that they should be part of a team.
Yeah.
You have to be really careful about what the end goal is and understand that, especially with shrinking budgets, and especially with such a rapidly changing landscape, we don't have the luxury of excessive rumination over things or of going down rabbit holes that don't need to be gone down. And that's very important. The other thing I would say is to really make sure that the team members can learn from one another, and that I find that a group that can learn from each other's skill sets and perspectives is a group that ultimately comes together and produces a much better product.
One tip. I would just say as much as possible to make it a place where people can bring their whole selves to work. And I have found lawyers particularly difficult clients, I would just say. And I mean, there's lots of ways to describe that, but one is just such an overemphasis on the mental function in the brain, and humans have, other centers of intelligence. You've got your heart, you've got your gut, And more, the kind of people law schools will hire and be educating are people who are not willing to leave that out. And so just making it a kind of place where people feel free to talk about not just the it, but also what does it feel like to be here? And what am I really struggling with?
Great. Okay. Cal.
I asked you to address a different aspect of collaboration. Most of the, what you've been mostly talking about is faculty to faculty and faculty with senior administrator collaboration. And one of the issues we've faced is having staff, all staff, feel like they're part of this collaborative effort. You know, newsletters about faculty accomplishments are great, and it is, after all, an academic endeavor, and everybody's on it, but there's not so much recognition about the work that others are doing. And so
Staff as well, but you're absolutely right.
so how do you make it, and part of it is faculty treatment of staff. Some people do that well and some people don't, and sort of how you deal with that. So there's just a wide variety of, there is a problem, and the question is solutions to make it collaboration with everybody there.
Well, we work with our staff pretty integrally in the sense that on our larger administrative group, we have our director for HR as well as our budget director and our admissions people. So we get a handle on what's going on with the staff through that process. We also have a lot of opportunities for the staff to meet with the deans, primarily the dean, in various meetings. We often have staff on our various committee meetings, particularly in things like admissions and curriculum. And we, as we've expanded into doing more university-wide projects and collaborative projects, often the glue that holds those together are the staff. And they are highly regarded because they are capable of dealing with many different players within the university bureaucracy. So we have a number of staff who are just critical to our graduate programs, our PhD program, our JD program, and some of the concurrent degree opportunities we have. Often those are held together and mediated by our staff people. And we try to appreciate them in every possible way we can. We do staff awards, both at a law school level and at a university level. And it's not unusual that I write more than one letter in a year to try to get one or more staff people recognized at the university level or at the law school level. So it's we've worked very hard with our staff, particularly since our last, as times have gotten difficult in budget times, our last layoff opportunity, which was some years ago, our dean then made a decision to make a vertical cut, and so there was cut at the staff level, and there were also cuts at the dean level, and I think that sent a signal to our staff that when bad times would come, all would share in the bad scene. The previous set of layoffs, about 10 years before that, we let go a whole slew of staff, 25% of our staff. So I think just the demonstration that when bad times came, everybody would share in the pain was a huge bonus for us. And I think since then, there's been an upswing in terms of how committed and integral our staff are to the success of the law school and all of its programs.
Anything?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Staff is critical, and really nothing can be successful without their level of input and effort. And one of the things, as we're radically shrinking the institution in terms of obviously our enrollment, but also the budgetary constraints we have, we really recognize the faculty and staff members who either together or individually are doing things, and we call them out. And especially with staff, we just had $3 million in energy reductions over the past 2 years. That's huge for an institution, and also on contracts. And we really celebrated the group that did this, a group of staff whose work is relatively unseen. And they were celebrated by the entire community as real leaders and innovators in how they thought through cracking this problem. And that was great. And now they're heralded as heroes of sorts.
Yeah.
But it's important to create that, because you don't want the faculty to forget how the place actually gets lit, gets clean, is run every day, how the food winds up in the faculty dining room. I mean, that's critically important, and sometimes I do think that can be forgotten.
Right. I predict for those of you who are just starting that you will find that one of the most exciting and enjoyable things about serving as an associate is working with the staff, because you tend not to know them nearly as well when you're on the faculty, and it's just a great thing.
So I have a question about communication from the faculty to the Dean Suite, because we've been talking a lot about communication from the Dean Suite to other constituencies. And I find the Dean Suite to be something of a bubble. And while I have 10% of my faculty and maybe 5% of my students who are going to come up to the Dean Suite weekly with the complaint or concern du jour, what really keeps me up at night are the 90% of the faculty members and the 95% of the students who are nurturing or harboring concerns, complaints, or grievances that they never bring up to the Dean Suite. And that I don't hear about and fester, and those are the problems that I really worry about, the problems I don't know about. And so I was wondering, what mechanisms, if any, have you developed to help nurture information coming up?
Well, for my students, once a month I do a session called Are You Happy Hour, in which I invite the entire student body to come and share with me whatever is that they want. I think for the faculty it's hard because every meeting with you is freighted for them. So you got to try to, walk in the hall. It's hard to find time to walk the halls. So you have to count. I think in a lot of senses, I think the dean counts a lot on his or her associate deans to circulate and bring those things up. I think that's actually a very important function for an associate dean to serve. I don't know how you all feel about that.
We have a situation where, with respect to, particularly with our younger faculty and our faculty who are proceeding up through the tenure track, our Associate Dean for Faculty Development and Research works assiduously with all of those faculty members. And so we get a pretty tight key to what they're thinking. With respect to the rest of the faculty, we do a fair bit of walking around and talking to people and finding out what's going on and checking out the scene. There's always going to be the faculty member who's not forthcoming and will not come to the Dean Suite and will not talk to you or will not be there. We do have faculty members who make themselves scarce, except when they teach. And we're not omniscient. There's no way for us to find out what they think. Our dean has a series of meetings with the faculty, coffee chats, that faculty sign up for, and that's another mode of being able to get information into the Dean Suite. And with respect to our students, we also and our staff, we also have meetings with the staff as well as the town hall meetings that are open to all, which are open to the students. And we also have dedicated 1L and 2L meetings where the students can come and speak to the dean and talk about any concerns they have. We actually have so many of these sorts of meetings that sometimes I think we have meeting exhaustion. And I think that may be a good thing. So sometimes we don't get very many people, but at least we've made the effort, and I think that that it's probably better to have too many of these than too few.
Yeah, I think that meeting exhaustion can happen. So one strategy is I think the associate deans can be extraordinarily helpful, and I get a lot of information from them. They're from the faculty, they have relationships, but I am very receptive to whatever the problem is, criticism or otherwise. And so I get a high degree of communication incoming from the faculty, but I do find that the associate dean, especially my academic dean, is critically important for that. And she and I check in every day, and if there's an issue bubbling, I get on top of it immediately by day's end, simply because there's no reason to not. It can only be counterproductive. I also personally, and this is helpful for an associate dean, I have lunch in the faculty dining room every Monday, but whenever we have a faculty meeting, I tend to go in there to make sure I can preview what I'm going to be talking about and make sure people are there to understand. That's helpful. Every Tuesday we have a scholarship lunch where a member of our faculty is talking about their work. I always go to that. I think it's critically important for me to be there and understand what's going on and to participate. It's not just because the dean is there, but I think that I need to be active and visible in both the scholarly life of the school as well as the business life of the school. And when it comes to students, I came in at a time with a lot of student morale problems. And so I am heavily involved in student activities. I have, we all have our office hours, but I go to the student cafeteria. If I'm at the school, instead of doing a fundraising call or something like that, I will go into the student cafeteria at least once a day during a prime time to establish my presence and to make sure that I talk to students I know and I'm getting a sense from them of what's going on. I also have regular email contact with students who I know. I also teach each semester. I'm in the classroom both semesters. And I encourage every one of my senior staff members who is a lawyer to be in the classroom, whether they're an administrator or whether they are part of the tenured or clinical faculty. So, and so the ones who aren't on the faculty, they're adjunct faculty. So we're all involved with students, and it's also understanding the life of both the professors and the life of the students.
So Jen, you want to add anything about this?
Yeah, well, I think what you're describing is you have a reputation now for receptivity, and well earned, it sounds like. But that is so worth. Yeah, absolutely. It takes a lot of time, and it's not the same thing as agreeing with everybody who has a complaint or being able to solve their problem. But it's just it sounds like you were known as somebody who will really listen. I'll give you my favorite listening metaphor, which is changing the game from ping pong to catch. Like, I got it. So ping pong is how most of us are used to talking, especially lawyers, right? So like, you make a point, I make a point, you make a point, I make a point. And when someone's really got a complaint, they do not want that ball just batted right back at them. They just want to know you heard them. And sometimes if you can just take the time to really slow down and catch it, just that is going to go such a long way to helping that person feel better or seeing possibilities they haven't seen yet for how they can solve their problem.
I find with that it being very present and more visible, especially with students, but of course with faculty, saying no becomes easier because it's part of a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue with the broader community, and they understand things in real time. It's not that, the dean made an appearance after not seeing him for 3 months and said no. That's kind of harsh. But, things, it's building community. We're in one building. It's easy enough. It does take the effort, and you have to be very cognizant of and conscious about what you're doing. But it's helped, I think, bring the overall community together.
Why don't we take like 2 or 3 questions in a row, and then we'll respond.
Hi, Jim Gibson at Richmond. Given that the collaborative culture sounds like it depends so much on sort of the character and selflessness of the personnel you're working with, I wonder if you guys have any observations about what to look for in the appointments process. You kind of talked about it as if you've been handed sort of a static group of people and you have to form teams, but this is actually sort of a dynamic process where you get to choose to some extent who your colleagues are. So any inside baseball on that one?
Let's take 2 more questions, and then we'll do them all at once.
Choosing well would make a difference to this question, but it's something I call the bench problem, which is, let's say we're selecting the committees for the coming year. We've got 2 or 3 major initiatives we want to pursue, and we look at the bench, and we say, it's a small bench of people who will be leaders. But you can't have them all be on one committee. You have to staff the committees with leaders and then other folks. And so how do you do that and come up with what turn out to be productive teams?
This kind of follows up on that last question, which is on my faculty of 30, it's small, but I think it would translate to other schools as well. There are really only about 5 people who are particularly good at playing with others and effective in getting things done. and they get sick of doing all the work.
Yeah.
So that would be any tips for engaging more of the folks who are shirkers in one sense of the word would be.
Well, right, those were certainly three good ones to put together, right? So the appointments process, the bench problem, and the playing well with others problem. Go for it.
Okay, well, we do have this issue of the bench. I think this is one of the problems that all institutions face. All faculties have this problem, where there's a core group that you can always depend on to take leadership roles, and there's a core group that, frankly, are never going to lead. They're either completely self-focused, they may want to lead, but they can't ever get off I, or they have no interest in engaging to that level. And then you've got a middle group that are still flexible. In our case, I would say that we've coupled the idea of that middle group with some of our hiring strategies. We've tried to hire young professors, often who have diverse experiences or come from diverse backgrounds, who are going to be willing to step up to the on bench in time. And we try through our Associate Dean for Faculty Development to nurture those leadership skills in our faculty. And we've been lucky in the sense that a couple of our recent hires have, even though they don't even have tenure yet, have stepped up into leadership positions. So that's been a good outcome. But it's never 100%. There's always, one you anticipated was going to be a great leader who's going to fall onto the backbench, so to speak. And we try to reward that kind of leadership by recognizing it and giving them glory as much as we can. And I think that helps, but it doesn't resolve the situation which exists in almost every institution, which is you will always have some people who are going to step up to lead, and there will always be some who will never be more than followers or unengaged. And so the idea is to minimize the latter and increase the former as much as you can, but there's never going to be a perfect 100% on the bench scene. It's just simply not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think one strategy, I won't repeat what you said, but one strategy is to think about if you need as many committees as you're describing, and consolidate the work of committees, and then choose who the leaders are and assign the mission for that appropriately. That's another approach. And sometimes what you think may fall within the jurisdiction of one committee can actually be assigned to a different committee very easily if reframed, and it's okay. Mm-hmm. You have to get things done, and so on the issue of how to choose what to look for, there's a lot of factors. I think you have to have personal chemistry with the people you're choosing, and you have to be able to, you don't have to be best friends with them, but you have to at least think you can have a very productive and hopefully enjoyable working relationship, and have values that at least see the core values as the same, and to make sure that you share that and they support where you want to go, and that they're going to be an advocate for the faculty and make sure they're keeping you in check appropriately.
Maybe I'll just answer the hiring and playing well with others. I think those are related. It's been such a common thing in all organizations that somebody is hired for their technical expertise and then fired for their people skills and people problems. And that happened so many times that now within big companies they're just way more savvy about the process and vetting people early on, not just on technical expertise, but really what is their relationship, what is their reputation for working with others. And I think that has a place, whether it's a law school or an organization, just to take that very seriously. And also, and it's hard in law schools because it's so regimented, but even for promotion and tenure, how do you bring that into the process too?
So I would just add that I think law schools are under more pressure on this area than a big company would be, because you really can have someone who brings great luster to your school, who is actually quite skilled in the classroom, who's a jerk. And so the question that was raised in the earlier panel about how many legal employers still say they want playing well with others and leadership and strategic planning and project management, and then when you actually look at what they do, they look at U.S. News ranking, GPA, and law review. And so and the same thing is true for faculty hiring, in the sense that the tenure process as it exists now is heavily weighted. It's supposed to be a third research, a third teaching, and a third service, but it's like 99.9% research. Because universities will overturn law school decisions based on scholarship, but not on anything else. So, my rule of thumb for your question about appointments is there's no prima donnas. If you get the impression that this person is going to arrive at your school and care only about himself or herself, I don't care how good their scholarship is. It's just not worth it. But other than that, so Aviva, you got passed over before, didn't you?
No, it follows up what you're saying, but I think I'd ask it more directly. The problem on law faculty is just, as with all faculties, we work a long time with each other. I mean, we've got 10 years, 20 years, long periods of times in history, and people have done bad things to each other and have, broken a lot of trust. I mean, they've betrayed you, they've stabbed you in the back, they've publicly gone, before you. And it's extraordinarily difficult to try to figure out how to form a team when you have this kind of past history, even though it's now your job. So given that fact, right, and I'll admit, I am somewhat unforgiving, it's true.
Right, law professor Alzheimer's, right? You remember only the grudges.
Yeah, right. So how do you address that, at the associate decanal level or the decanal level, when you're trying to functionally, we have an it that we must do on our missions, but we have a real potential we problem, in the fact that there is possible history.
That's a great
Well,
question. That's a great question.
Is your question similar?
That is to say, how do you get, along with this, faculty members to value each other and what they're doing, so that you have maybe people who are doing scholarship, but then other people who are taking on leadership because we have a small bench and maybe their scholarship is not quite as prolific. So how do you get faculty members to value each other for what they add? And that goes along with holding grudges.
Okay, well, I think there's a lot of questions in there, and there's a lot of different answers. I think that one of the issues that you speak of is where there's been a history of backstabbing. We have actually evolved beyond that. I would say when I first started at UW 20 years ago, this backstabbing phenomenon was part of our lives. And that has changed over 20 years, and it's been the work of several good deans, as well as some of the new hires that we've made over the years, and sort of the changing of the culture. I'm not even sure if there was a signal event that caused that, other than it became clear we couldn't be productive within the university and be innovative, and that became more important than backstabbing. We still have some of the bad guys who used to do that, but they're pretty quiescent now, and they don't actually seek to stab the way they used to. We've also benefited tremendously over the last 15 years, and particularly the last 4 or 5 years, with a diversification of our faculty outside of the tenure side. So we have, of course, we have tenured faculty, and still in the tenure track faculty group, young faculty who are coming along, hopefully to be leaders as well. But we also have now a healthy group of faculty who are without tenure. Many of these are practitioners and residents, or people who've retired from practice and want to teach, and teach a lot for us, and have become colleagues to our tenure track faculty members. We have one gentleman who teaches, who taught for us as an adjunct for long before I came, a young, vital man who was the head of litigation at a very big firm, who said, I'm retired, I'm going to quit practicing, and I'd really like to teach, and I don't need to be paid too much, but I'd like to teach, and I'd like to teach and be part of the faculty. And we had the great good sense to take him. He has been a wonderful colleague and has helped actually our students and our faculty to become more cognizant of what it is that the practice world needs. We've also hired Some of our programs are set up so that they're what we call fee-based or self-sustaining, and the university won't grant tenure for those programs. So we bring in people on a WOT basis there, without tenure basis. These have been very valuable faculty members. We now have quite a number, and it's changed the culture. And so diversification of faculty has been key, and that includes bringing in people in the lecturer and instructor levels that have helped us become, I think, a broader-based faculty than the classical tenure-track faculty system that was present when I started teaching in 1994. I think that's helped us tremendously, and it also helps them on the leadership side. Some of those folks are the folks who are on the bench, and our tenure-track faculty who might have been happy to recede into their scholarly ways look at this and say, gee, you know, maybe I should be thinking about doing some of this, being a leader as well. There's always the issue of, is scholarship valued more than service, more than leadership, more than teaching? And that's a debate that goes on in our institution as well. I think we've tried, particularly over the last few years, to make it clear that every contribution is valued. And yes, we do want people to do scholarship, but that's not the only coin in the bank that we value. So it's a work in progress. What can I say?
I would just add that I am in the middle of that right now, where there are two faculty members that absolutely have to work together, and there is a long-standing animosity. I'm actually trying to broker peace, and I've done this, but I actually think we're making some headway, and it's like, you know, their history is not part of my history. I'm new, but I can help try and tackle some of that, and I am. So as I think, as a senior administrator, an academic dean or a dean can and should be cognizant of what's out there, and if appropriate, try and bring people together by hitting the issues head on. There's a lot of I also find there is a lot of animus towards certain faculty members, and the animus is not necessarily understood or even realized by the faculty member who's in question. And so I can't emphasize enough how, if you really want to lead, it's okay to have the hard conversations and simply have them and say, did you know that people say this about you? I don't think that they should be saying that about you. Why are they doing that? How can we fix that? I need you to be as productive a team member as possible, but I can't if people don't want to work with you. And you don't tell who's saying what, but you know, and I've got that issue going on very much so right now with somebody who I think is really great, but everyone else doesn't like him. So I've got to figure out how to reconcile some complex issues.
You want to add anything?
Oh, I feel you, first of all. Say, and there are some things that I would try with some groups that I probably wouldn't try with a group of law professors because of just kind of inherent cynicism. So it's tough. It's really tough. And Pat, I appreciate what you said. There's a story you have about 20 years ago it was this way, now it's changed. So taking the long view, you know, not expecting it to change overnight. And I love this Japanese concept of anytime making change of Kaizen. Have you heard that? Which is just very, very small changes. And I do think that the center of gravity can shift from the culture being determined by a group of toxic people to, over time, the culture being, you know, the dominant feel being a group that is banded together that's really committed to create a different feeling here. And it doesn't matter what your it could even be students partly, but just a group that takes that so seriously, I do think could make a difference.
So I would add that there's a difference between sort of what you might call the blood feud and the slight. So I start with the slights, right? So there are people who still remember that they didn't get invited to so-and-so's party, right? And that, you can deal with that, right? And sometimes the nature of the disagreements are, you know, a faculty might have, you know, a so-called intellectual group and a more practical group. And the practical group resents the intellectual group for thinking that they're less worthy, and the intellectual group resents the practical group for thinking that they are, whatever it is. And you can sort of try to unearth that and the blood feuds. I got no clue. So when you figure it out, you let me know. And as far as getting people to value each other, for me, the starting point is if you value everyone, that's a good start. So for many years at Connecticut, every time someone published something, whether it was a 2-page article in a bar journal or a 30-page article or a 70-page journal in a law review, I would write a critique of it and send it around. And the critique was, "This is great, this is fabulous," and then I would put in 2 or 3. If you had thought about this, it would have been still better. So that people would all feel included. And I think you can do that with teaching and so forth, and I think that'd be a good thing. All right, we're out of time. I don't want to stand between you and the reception. Thank you very much for being here, and Phil, thank you very much for that.